She's just, not much of anything, is she? Carol didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the cousins to laugh, right as I walked past the dessert table holding the pie I baked. Jenna smirked. Derek didn't flinch. I stood there, pie trembling in my hands, while laughter rose around me like steam. 12 years married, 3 family reunions missed for his work, 1 smile I forced through gritted teeth. And not a single word spoken in my defense. She writes little things. Right? Jenna added. Still trying to get published? The irony was violent. My book had hit the NYT list that week. But I hadn't told them. Because dignity doesn't beg to be seen. And they were never listening anyway. Derek chuckled lightly, not cruel, just detached. Like watching a joke at someone else's expense was easier than admitting it was your wife. He tapped his glass, moved the conversation along. I placed the pie on the table. Cherry, homemade, untouched. The same one Carol had requested. The same one no one looked at. I straightened the tablecloth. Then my spine. Then turned to walk outside. The sun hit hard in Virginia. That kind of southern glare that makes shadows louder. I stood by the gravel road, my heels sinking slightly. It didn't matter. I wasn't staying long. Marcelo texted, wheels down in 3. Let me know when you're ready. I replied with one word, now. Behind me, someone asked, is she leaving already? They wouldn't understand until they heard it. The sound came before the sight, the low, polished hum of rotors slicing through judgment. One by one, faces turned toward the field. Carol stepped outside, squinting. Is that a helicopter? No, Carol. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a Gulfstream. Polished, personal, paid in full. The one I chartered for the week. Because when they made plans to mock me, I made arrangements to rise. Derek followed me out. His voice uncertain now. Amelia, where are you going? I didn't answer. I adjusted my sunglasses. And took the steps toward the landing strip. Each one louder than his silence. Marcelo met me by the door. Smiled. Didn't need to ask anything. Because he knew, and I had already told him, I want the door open when they're watching. And it was. I paused before boarding. Looked back once. Carol still staring. Jenna holding her phone but not recording. Derek frozen. My pie still untouched. Perfect. I handed Marcelo a small envelope. Inside, one photo of the book cover. Signed. To Derek's mother, from someone who became something after all. He placed it on the table before we closed the cabin door. The jet rose. Smooth, fast, free. Below me, 12 years of erasure looked very, very small. And I? Was finally large. We met in a bookstore. He reached for the same copy of Sapiens. Smiled, asked if I was actually going to read it or just decorate with it. I laughed, not offended. He had that charm, the kind that looks like intelligence from far away. Up close, it felt like certainty. He said he admired women who read. Said ambition was sexy. That he'd never want a wife who didn't have her own path. And I believed him. Because he quoted Baldwin, held my hand in museums, and once cried during a documentary. We married 2 years later. A small vineyard, minimalist vows. He promised me space. I promised him support. He wanted a partner. I wanted a home. We both got half of that. His business started small, consulting, marketing, a few freelance gigs. I edited his pitch decks. In our kitchen while he said, just until things take off. They did. With my revisions, my copy, and my silence. He told his clients he had a branding expert. Never mentioned it was his wife. He got invited to panels. I got asked to pick up his suits. But I smiled. Because love, they said, is about showing up. My own writing stayed in folders. He said, why don't you blog first? Or maybe after. The company stabilizes. And I listened. Because dreams can wait when love needs room. Right, his family always preferred Jenna. Polished, loud, camera ready. She called me classic. Carol once asked if I'd ever consider a makeover. I laughed. They didn't. Neither did Derek. The first reunion, he introduced me as Amelia, she writes stuff. I corrected him, actually, I'm a non-fiction author. He kissed my cheek. Said, still chasing that dream, huh? I swallowed the hurt with potato salad. And changed the subject. We moved into a bigger house. His name on the mortgage. Mine on the interior decisions. He liked it that way, me involved, but not remembered. Present, but not pivotal. At dinner parties, he told stories I lived through without including me in them. You were there, he'd say later. But being there isn't the same as being seen. And I stopped correcting him. He called my success cute. When I sold my first piece, I told him it meant the world. He said, let's not make a big deal of it. And I didn't. Because applause felt selfish when you're already invisible. When I finally signed a publishing contract, he forgot to show up to the call. Said his meeting ran long. But he made it to his brother's golf trip that weekend. I sent myself flowers that day. He never noticed. Or maybe he did. He once said, "Your world is quiet. Mine is loud." As if quiet meant less. But my words filled pages. His filled rooms. And I realized he liked his world better when mine was folded into it. Still, I stayed. Cooked. Traveled. Supported. Because we don't walk away from people just because they forget how to clap. Until they start clapping for others while you disappear from the frame. That's when it changes, and it changed. Not with a scream. But with a glance at my own life, and the choice to live it out loud, even if it meant flying alone. It started with the chairs. Always one less at the table than needed. I'd stand behind Jenna, waiting, while Derek said, "Oh, just grab one from the garage." I did. Every time. Because I learned to make room for myself. Then it was the photos. Family pictures on the mantle, vacations I was part of, but somehow not included in the frame. Jenna front and center. Carol holding her baby. Me? Probably in the kitchen. They'd say Carol stopped using my name. She called me her, or your wife. At first I thought it was memory. Then I realized it was deliberate. You can't insult what you don't acknowledge. And invisibility was safer than confrontation in their world. Derek stopped holding my hand in public. He said it looked old-fashioned. But he held Jenna's kid at every barbecue. And held his phone during dinner with me. Affection was always rationed, given when convenient, withheld when I needed it. He started telling jokes that ended with my silence. Amelia's too smart for TikTok. Amelia doesn't do crowds. Amelia would rather read than dance. And they all laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it made me smaller. My ideas became his talking points. He'd repeat something I said, at meetings, over wine, during calls, and take credit with a smile. I called it partnership. But it was theft with better PR. At events, I was the writer wife. As if my presence needed justification. I introduced myself. Once. Carol interrupted, "She married well." I swallowed the sentence I wanted to say. Not because I lacked words, but because I knew they wouldn't land. Jenna posted constantly. Brunches, Pilates, charity balls. Each one tagged with Derek's company. I wasn't in them. Even when I was there. Cropping is a skill, and she mastered it. He stopped asking about my deadlines. Stopped noticing when I submitted. I mentioned a review in the Atlantic. He blinked, then asked if I'd picked up dry cleaning. My milestones became background noise to his curated life. And I grew quiet and returned. He'd travel without telling me. Find excuses to stay longer. He said the house was too quiet when he was gone. But he never invited me along. The silence became a roommate. More consistent than his presence. More honest, too. Once, I got sick. Fever, chills, flat on the bathroom floor. He texted from a conference, "Drink tea, I guess?" Jenna sent soup, by accident, to the wrong Amelia. I laughed, then cried while reheating it. The bedroom changed too. Pillows removed. My perfume replaced by air purifiers. He said it was allergies. I knew it was avoidance. He started sleeping at the edge, and I stopped reaching for the middle. He used to read my drafts. Offer notes, ideas. Now he'd say, "Still working on that same one?" Like persistence was failure. Like completion didn't matter unless it came with applause. And he never clapped for me. I once overheard him say, "She's not ambitious like Jenna. More low-key." As if quiet meant lazy. As if grace was weakness. I stared at my laptop screen, at the article being published next week. And felt fire. Under silence, but the worst moment came in our own home. He hosted a dinner. Introduced me last. Then said, "She's good at letting me shine." Everyone laughed. So I did too. And wrote it down that night, word for word. It was supposed to be a simple family weekend. Carol's garden party. Linen dresses, champagne flutes, curated playlists. She asked us to arrive early to help set up. I baked 3 pies, arranged centerpieces. Jenna arrived 30 minutes late, with a photographer. She wore white. Again. As if the day were hers. And maybe it was. Because Derek walked to her before greeting me. Held her elbow. Laughed too hard that he didn't see me standing there, or pretended not to. Carol gave her a bouquet for being so helpful. Jenna smiled and said, "All for the family." Derek nodded like she was the wife. I held a tray of glasses, and didn't drop a single one. Later, at the long table, they gave speeches. Carol toasted to strong women who raise strong families. Jenna blew a kiss to the crowd. I looked at Derek. He looked at his wine. Said nothing. When I stood to excuse myself, Jenna reached out, touched my wrist. Said, "You really don't have to try so hard, Amelia." I stared at her hand. Then, at her wedding band, identical to mine. Just shinier. I turned to Derek. Waited for him to correct her. To say something. He shrugged. Smiled that rehearsed smile. And said, don't take it personally. She's just playing. But it wasn't a game to me. After dinner, I stepped into the kitchen. Saw a photo on Jenna's phone, left on the counter. It was a picture of her and Derek, in a hotel suite I didn't recognize. Captioned, finally ours. Dated last month, the blood drained from my face. 12 years. And this is how I found out. Not with screams, not with receipts, but with a single careless photo left in a house I helped build. I didn't confront him. Didn't storm out. I returned to the table. Sat through dessert. Spoke when spoken to. Smiled once. And finished my wine. Carol handed out gifts after dinner. Silver frames, one for each couple. Inside ours, a photo of Jenna, Derek, and Carol. I blinked. Asked, was this a mistake? Carol said, oh. You weren't in that one, were you? No one laughed. I walked to the guest room. Packed my things in silence. My laptop, my shoes, the notebook he never read. He followed. Amelia, don't be dramatic. I didn't reply. Because drama is loud, and I had other plans. He said, you knew we weren't working. I nodded. Finally, something we agreed on. He added, it's just easier with her. And with that, 12 years folded into one sentence of cowardice. He kissed my forehead like I was a child. Then walked back to the party. I stood there, frozen, not with sadness, but with clarity. There would be no yelling. Only strategy. I booked my flight that night. But not the one they expected. Not the economy seat, not the quiet ride home. I called Marcelo. Said, I'll need the jet next Friday. He replied, where to? I said, anywhere they can see it land. And then I wrote the check. A donation in my own name. To the local women's foundation hosting a gala the same day as Carol's brunch. Because they could call me invisible, but my presence would echo where it mattered. I woke at dawn, heart hammering, but no one was there to witness my dread. The guest room was cold, familiar, yet full of echoes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door where they'd just closed in laughter. My hands shook, first time in years. I touched my face, traced my ring finger. Felt the weight of what I demanded only to be dismissed. The room spun quiet circles, and I sank into a grief that had no outlet. I didn't unpack. The suitcase lay open, clothes draped askew. I thought of all the times I'd rearranged his collared shirts, planned outfits to match his ambitions, while mine remained unworn, untouched, invisible. This time, I left everything right. The silence was loud. It pressed around me like linen walls. I wore a robe that smelled of Carol's candles, faintly comforting, faintly mocking. I let tears fall without sound, let them trace lines down my cheeks, as if each one marked a silent farewell. I tried to sleep again. But memory doesn't let you rest. I heard Jenna's laugh. Felt Derek's shoulder lean away. Even Carol's glare replayed in sharp focus. I shut my eyes tight, then opened them wider. I sat at the window, watched the helicopter's shadow slice across dawn. Freedom hovered there, just out of reach. I pounded my chest once, then again. A heartbeat that felt more real than apology. I called my editor, voice trembling. I said, delay the next chapter while I fix my life. She replied, take as long as you need. That line, simple, unembellished, felt like oxygen. Because someone finally spoke me whole again. No one called. Not Derek. Not Marcelo. Not even Jenna, who always tagged me in posts. Their silence matched mine. A mirror of absence. I chose to hold mine more steadily. I wasn't angry yet. Just collapsing. Like a building with no foundation. But grief isn't failure. It's soil. And I realized my roots were still intact. I wrote in my journal. Again. First line, I left. Not broken, but unbowed. I rewrote that line another 50 times. Until it felt like both confession and declaration. I didn't eat. Coffee went cold. Bread grew hard on the counter. Because loss demands space. And I gave it every inch of silence I could find. My tears ran dry by lunch. Then my body went numb. Desire turned off. But clarity flickered, cold and small, yet steady. At dusk, I walked outside, barefoot on grass. The world smelled green, unchanged. Indifferent. I breathed in the scent. Breathed out the weight. Took one step, then another. I didn't call him. Not that day. Not the next morning either. Let him simmer in his own absence. Let every gust remind him what his distance cost. I patched my robes. Sleeves with careful stitches, because mending is quiet work. Same with the Women's Foundation donation I executed moments ago. I could write impact without a speech. As night fell, I lit a candle. Gray smoke curled. I let it burn long enough to see the darkness settle, but not long enough to lose the light. A balance I intended to keep. It started with the box. Labeled Derek's papers, shoved beneath old tax folders. I hadn't touched it in years. But the cleaning helped me breathe. And cleaning reveals things. Especially truths buried by neglect, inside, contracts, receipts, scribbled timelines. Most were unremarkable. Except one folder marked in my handwriting, prenup, personal copy. I'd forgotten it existed. But my hands remembered. They shook as I opened it. I sat at the desk. Flipped each page slowly. His signature everywhere. My initials on each clause. Then page 7. One line, bold, buried under legal terms. All intellectual property created during marriage belongs solely to the author. My breath stopped. I read it again. And again. He hadn't read that far. I remembered the day he signed it. Distracted, arrogant, late for a call. I trust you, he'd said. 12 years of essays. Articles. Marketing strategies with my fingerprints. Book drafts. Even the keynote speech he gave last spring, the one the family praised him for. All mine. My editor once asked if he contributed. I'd said no. Now, I had proof that even his successes were standing on foundations he didn't pour. And couldn't legally claim. I found the pitch deck we built together. His investors had copies. But the copywriting, branding, tone? All pulled from my drafts. I compared dates. Every sentence I'd written was traceable. And owned that I didn't feel rage. Not yet. Just focus. Precise, sharp. Like a thread had finally tightened through the chaos. And now I could stitch my own ending. I made 3 calls. One to my lawyer. One to my publisher. One to Marcelo. All brief. All direct. None of them questioned me. The lawyer said, "Do you want to go public?" I said, "Not yet." Because noise wasn't the weapon. Timing was. And reputation doesn't recover from quiet collapse built with proof. I forwarded the prenup to my editor. She responded with 3 words, "I have ideas." I knew what she meant. We weren't writing revenge. We were writing truth. Truth. Monetized. I booked a table at the same restaurant where Derek proposed. The reservation was in my name. Private room. 1 seat. 1 envelope. I left it with the host. Inside the envelope, page 7. Framed. Signed by both of us. With a sticky note attached, "You might want to start reading things." No return address. I returned home, opened my laptop, and began a new document. Title, Inheritance of Silence. It would not be about him, but he would live inside every chapter as absence, not subject. The game had flipped. He still had the spotlight, but I had the copyright. And when the truth lands slowly, it leaves deeper cracks. I planned to let it fall 1 sentence at a time. The foundation gala arrived quietly. Carol posted about it for weeks. Jenna had a new dress flown in. Derek rehearsed a toast. The whole Langford family prepared to take center stage, unaware that the script had changed. I arrived 30 minutes late. Not by mistake, by design. Marcelo opened the car door in silence. I stepped out in black silk, no jewelry. Just 1 envelope in hand. The valet paused. Not at me, at the small plaque on the car door, Author of the Year, sponsored by Langford Media. A title Derek had given me years ago, as a joke. Now it was on display. I walked into the venue. The room dimmed as I entered. Not from lights, but attention. Carol's smile faltered. Jenna whispered something. Derek stood up. He didn't expect me. He hadn't invited me. But it was a public space, and my name was on the donor list. Under top patron, $100,000 in my own name. No one else knew. Until that night, the host stepped forward. Announced a surprise reading from the anonymous benefactor. A passage from a soon-to-be published memoir. I didn't take the mic. The host read it. Word for word, she stood beside a man who borrowed her brilliance, and called it his. Until she stopped editing his legacy, and began publishing her own. The room went still. Jenna paled. Derek froze. After the reading, the spotlight landed on me. But I didn't speak. I only nodded. And handed the host 1 final envelope. She opened it slowly. Page 7. Framed. The crowd murmured. Carol reached for her glass. Derek started walking toward me. But Marcelo stepped forward. Handed me my coat. And I turned, leaving him mid-step. As I walked out, a young woman grabbed my arm. Was that about him? I smiled. No. It was about me. Finally. Outside, the jet waited. Not for drama, but for closure. Because sometimes the most elegant exit is the one no one expects. Jenna posted nothing that night. Carol deleted 3 stories. Derek called 6 times. I didn't answer. Because the moment had landed. And I had flown. My book pre-orders tripled. The press wanted interviews. I gave none. My silence was sharper than any headline. They asked how I planned it. I said, I didn't. I wrote it. Derek tried to claim credit for parts of the manuscript. My lawyer sent the prenup. Highlighted. Signed. undeniable. And legal, his company's stock slipped 12%. Not from scandal, but from doubt. No one trusts a man who loses his story to the woman he tried to erase. I didn't dance that night. Didn't celebrate. I returned to the jet, sat by the window, watched the gala fade below. And whispered, silence wins. I moved into a smaller place. White walls. Open light. No echoes of someone else's name on the lease. No monogram towels I never picked. Just my books, my silence, and one chair by the window. Because rebirth doesn't need applause, only space. The first morning there, I brewed coffee. For no one. And it was perfect. I wrote in a notebook labeled Unclaimed Days. The first line said, he erased me. So I rewrote everything. That notebook filled faster than any manuscript. I declined interviews. Refused television panels. I didn't want to become a headline next to his. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a scandal. I was a beginning. Marcelo still flew for me. But now, it was to places I chose, quiet villas, libraries, sea towns. He once said, you travel differently now. And I smiled. Because I didn't have to explain. People who witness your silence know your strength. My book hit #1. He called. I let it ring. Not because I was angry, but because some voices don't belong in the chapters you author for yourself. Carol sent a letter. A card with no return address. It said, you turned out more than we imagined. I burned it. Watched the ash fall like apology with no weight. And swept it away. Jenna went quiet on social media. Her captions became shorter. Her photos, less posed. I wasn't watching, but others told me. And I nodded. Sometimes silence is contagious. I framed page 7. Hung it in my hallway. Right across from the mirror. Every morning, I passed both. The proof he ignored. And the woman who made him regret it. Side by side, but no longer connected. I never replaced my wedding ring. It still sat in a dish by the sink, not because I mourned him. But because it reminded me how easily metal tarnishes when handled. Without care. It stayed there. Unpolished. I walked barefoot more. Learned to cook for one. Started a foundation for young women authors with voices no one had believed in, yet. Because I knew how it felt to be called small by people who hadn't read a word you wrote. I laughed again. Not performatively. Not politely. But freely. Once, on a rooftop in Rome, wine in hand, sun on my face, and no one to interrupt. The world felt bigger now. Not because I traveled, but because I occupied space without shrinking. Every email signed with my full name. Every word owned. Every breath mined. I stopped explaining my past. Stopped correcting their version. I didn't need them to know. I needed only one truth. That I survived without screaming. And succeeded without returning. That was enough. Derek remarried. To someone newer. Louder. Easier. They posed on yachts. But silence has a long memory. And one day, in a bookstore, he'll see my name on a shelf and remember the one who left quietly, but I won't be there. I'll be somewhere warm. Hands ink-stained. Heart intact. And when someone asks about him, I'll smile and say, he was a preface. I was the book.